when to use graphs. Graphs resemble tables as the means of presenting data in an organized way. In fact, the results of many experiments can be presented either as tables or as graphs. How do we decide which is preferable? This is often a difficult decision. A good rule might be this: if the data show pronounced trends, making an interesting picture, use a graph. If the numbers just sit there with no exciting trend in evidence, a table should be satisfactory and perhaps easier and cheaper for you to prepare. Tables are also preferred for presenting exact numbers. Examine Table 17.1 and Figure 17.2, both of which record exactly the same data. Either format would be acceptable for publication, but Figure 17.2 clearly seems superior to Table 17.1. In the figure, the synergistic action of the two drug combination is immediately apparent. Thus, the reader can quickly grasp the significance of the data. It also appears from the graph that streptomycin is more effective than is isoniazid, although its action is somewhat slower. This aspect of the results is not readily apparent from the table. How to prepare graphs? Today, we prepare graphs by computer. However, the principles of producing good graphs have not changed. The sizes of the letters and symbols, for example, must be chosen so that the final published graph in a journal is clear and readable. The size of the lettering must be based on the anticipated reduction that will occur in the publishing process. This factor can be especially important if you are combining two or more graphs into a single illustration. Remember, text that is easy to read on a large computer screen may become illegible when reduced to the width of a journal column. Each graph should be as simple as possible. The most common disaster in illustration is to include too much information in one figure. Too much information in an illustration confuses and discourages the reader. Figure 17.3 is a nice graph. The lettering is large enough to read easily. It is boxed rather than two-sided. Compare with figure 17.2, making it a bit easier to estimate the values on the right-hand side of the graph. The scribe marks point inward rather than outward. If your paper contains two or more graphs that are most meaningful when viewed together, consider grouping them in a single illustration. To maximize readability, place the graphs above and below each other rather than side by side. For example, in a two-column journal, placing three graphs in an above and below arrangement allows each graph to be one or two columns in width. If the graphs appear side by side, each can average only 1/3 of a page wide. Whether or not you group graphs in such a composite arrangement, be consistent from graph to graph. For example, if you are comparing interventions, keep using the same symbol for the same intervention. Also, be consistent in other aspects of design. Both conceptually and aesthetically, the graphs in your paper should function as a set. Do not extend the ordinate or the abscissa or the explanatory wording beyond what the graph demands. For example, if your data points range between 0 and 78, your topmost index number should be 80. You might feel a tendency to extend the graph to 100, a nice round number. This urge is especially difficult to resist if the data points are percentages, for which the natural range is 0 to 100. Resist this urge, however. If you do not, parts of your graph will be empty. Worse, the left part of your graph will then be restricted in dimension because you have wasted perhaps 20% or more of the width or height with empty white space. In the preceding example, data points ranging from 0 to 78, your reference numbers should be 0, 20, 40, 60, and 80. You should use short index lines at each of these numbers and also at the intermediate tenths, 10, 30, 50, 70. Obviously, a reference stub line halfway between 0 and 20 could only be 10. Thus, you need not ladder the tens, and you can then use larger lettering for the 20s without squeezing. By using such techniques, you can make graphs simple and effective instead of cluttered and confusing.